Hello, my name is Dr. Charles Young and I'm one of the Care Vision's directors. In this Insights video, Jeremy Hughes CBE will be talking to Professor James Vickers. James is the head of the Tasmania Medical School and also director of the Wicking Dementia Research and Education Centre at the University of Tasmania. James will be talking about two research studies which focused on the importance of early and later life education in the risk of developing dementia. I hope you enjoy this video.
I'm delighted to have with me today Professor James Vickers, who's been held the chair of pathology at the University of Tasmania since 2003, and is one of the leading researchers around the world into Alzheimer's disease and other neurodegenerative conditions. Dementia has become increasingly high profile, really, over the decade in the time that you've been at Tasmania. Can you just tell me a little bit about what got you into this line of research in the first place?
Yes, so my main background is in neuroscience research. So that's studying human brains and some experimental animal models and nerve cells that you grow in culture. But I guess over time, even though that was I was hoping would be useful work and interesting research, I really was kind of led into trying to think about doing some things that were a bit more useful for human beings. And the Wicking Centre is a great place to do that kind of work because there's people with all sorts of different academic and clinical backgrounds. And so the idea of doing some more things in education and now in this area around managing dementia risk was a very appealing opportunity that we were only really able to do because I had great colleagues to help me do that.
But tell me a little bit about the context of research into Alzheimer's and other neurodegenerative conditions, because the focus historically has been very much about drug development and pharmacological development. Is that going to be the answer, or is that still a very long pipeline to get anything coming through?
Well, I still think that is a long pipeline. I mean, there are a lot of really terrific research groups and researchers involved in that area, and there's certainly a lot of research money going into that as well, which has been great. But I think if we take pretty much any of the major conditions that cause dementia, like Alzheimer's disease, we're probably not quite yet understanding all of the fundamental cellular changes that lead to disease and pathology inside the brain. And I think once we understand that as well as we should, then we could probably come up with some much better drugs and therapeutic interventions to try and prevent those disease changes. But I always do say that, I think one of the good news story about conditions such as Alzheimer's disease is that they are disease processes. So again, if we understood those really, really well, we would know where to interfere in that disease process and stop dementia from happening in the first place, hopefully.
So whilst the pharmacological intervention program, as you say, is a long haul and there's a gradual increasing of learning, what seems to have accelerated a lot in the past 10 years or so is an understanding of how you go about preventing or managing the risks associated with dementia. I think about 10 years ago or a bit less, the National Institute of Health in the United States didn't really accept that there was any modifiable risks that could be associated with dementia. Tell me, what part have you played in changing that perception and that understanding of the risk factors, and where are we now?
Well, that research field, as you've noted, really has matured dramatically, really, in just the last few years. And this is research, I think, that's been going on for some time in the US and also in Europe and the UK in particular. And there's these long-term population studies that are really firmed up that there's a suite of risk factors that if we could potentially do something about those, then we would reduce the risk of dementia. But I guess it's important to note that most of our risk of dementia really lies around aging. The older you are, the higher risk you have of developing dementia. Genetics also probably plays a role there. But it is actually, again, kind of good news that there are at least this set of risk factors that seem to play a part as well. So again, the consensus is that if we could deal with all of those risk factors, which would be a very tricky thing to do, but if we could deal with all of them, then around about we would see a 40% reduction in the numbers of people developing dementia, which if you say compare that to any kind of drug intervention, that would be a very good result. Probably know more about Alzheimer's disease and vascular dementia, but then less so about the risk factors for modifiable risk factors for some other causes like frontotemporal dementia or Lewy body disease. But many of those epidemiological studies or population studies looked at dementia overall. So it is likely that many of those risk factors that are important for vascular dementia or Alzheimer's disease may well turn out to be important for other major diseases and causes of dementia.
And a lot has changed, as we said, in the last decade or last 5-6 years. What about the research that you're doing in Tasmania to take this forward, the epidemiological studies that you're leading? Where are they got to at the moment?
Well, we've got two major studies in this area. The one we've had, I guess, published on historically has looked at the role of education. So again, lots of other people's work has shown that the more education that you have earlier in life, the less chance you have of developing dementia later in your life. And this is an idea that, but through education, you might build up reserve or a capacity to have higher amounts of resilience to pathology as it builds up inside your brain. It may not stop you from getting the pathology, but your ability to resist it might be higher. Where we got involved is to look at whether education later in life might have a potential beneficial effect. And we're based on an island of about 500,000 people. People don't tend to move very much out or into the island, so it's a very stable and ageing population. So we convinced just over 500 Tasmanians to become involved in a project about 10 years ago, where about 400 or so got involved in doing more education. And rather ingeniously, we worked at a university, so we got them involved in university level education. Some did a little, some did quite a lot, and then we've been following them over time. And all the signals at the moment, we're about 10 years in, but it's really a 15-year project overall. But about 10 years in, we've basically shown that education might build your cognitive abilities in particular areas that are linked to resilience, and in particular verbal memory and language processing seem to be areas that will improve if you're an older adult who comes back into education. So we're hoping that building those capacities again might be sort of a bulwark against future risk of dementia. But we'll know about that in about 5 years' time.
That's a fascinating study. And how have you found out how intense that education process needs to be? Is it a heavy university course, or is it more accessible to a large number of people to participate in?
Yeah, that's what we're interested in sort of dissecting out now. Again, we know that some people did very little education, only a couple of university units, and some have done whole degrees and PhDs and things. There does seem to be a bit of a link to how much that you do, but it just seems to be the engagement in that university education is more important than the amount at the moment. But again, we'll see that over, we'll see how that pans out over time.
More information about the work of the Wicking Dementia Research and Education Centre, the publications and projects discussed in this video are available on screen and in the description links below. Please do subscribe to our award-winning YouTube channel for more Healthy Aging Insights videos from CareVision's Healthy Aging.